Welcome to chapter 12 of your 2024 story. My name is Michelle, owner and founder of Movara Fitness Resort. And this week we are addressing emotional eating, which is a problem and concern that most people have and maybe don't even realize. At the resort, we often will put lectures on our lecture schedule. And if we ever put the title emotional eating, it's interesting because we see some that are like, oh, I don't struggle with emotional eating, or maybe there's shame in it and they don't even want to go and address it. But I believe most of us emotionally eat at some point in our life, whether we realize it or not. And emotional eating is something that can be, that can lead to feelings of shame, and also definitely can lead to unhealthy eating habits. And of course, weight gain. It's again, a common problem that most people face. And it's the act of turning to food for comfort, stress relief, or as a reward rather than to satisfy hunger. So oftentimes the emotional eating is not just like, I feel sad, I feel anxiety or depression, because sometimes we think of emotional eating as a coping mechanism for, sadder emotions, but a lot of times we emotionally eat out of happy emotions as well. So recognizing that oftentimes we turn to food to satisfy a lot of different emotions. At the resort, we teach a class called the Movara Model, and the class starts out with showing a diagram. At the beginning of the diagram, there's a circle that we talk about our basic needs, and it's a circle for a reason. It's the shape of a steering wheel that drives our results. So at the end of the model, we have our results, and then we show how all of the things in the middle between the circle and the results lead to the results. So we have the basic needs, again, the very beginning, that drive the model, and we all have basic needs that need to be met. And oftentimes we're trying to meet those needs with other ways than actually what's going to meet those needs, such as turning to food. So we're going to talk about 5 different strategies for overcoming emotional eating. And again, just awareness. We've talked a lot over the weeks, these last 12 weeks. Awareness oftentimes is the first step. Oftentimes, even when we dissect the model, the Movara model, it literally is just bringing awareness to, okay, if I have certain needs that aren't being met, what is driving, and what results don't I like that I'm not happy with, and how can I identify beliefs that I may have that are causing the results that I don't want, and in a result of trying to meet certain needs. And again, sometimes this is something that we're completely unaware of, that maybe we learned as a child over the years we've had as a habit, or we have been so influenced by the outside comparisons that we're totally unaware of it. So a lot of times the awareness is the first step in anything. So that's the first strategy, is to become aware of just the types of or times that you may be over or emotionally eating. So this involves understanding the difference between physical hunger and emotional hunger. We talked earlier, I believe it was last week or the week before, when we talked about the hunger scale and learning that, okay, am I hungry? Or am I tired? My husband always quotes, and I believe it's from the Grinch, but I'm just bored. Am I hungry or am I bored with eating? And a lot of times that is the case. So it's recognizing the difference between physical hunger. I've had guests oftentimes say, after being at the resort for a couple days, that, wow, it's amazing how great it is to feel those hunger feelings again, because oftentimes we just eat because we feel like we need to eat, or it's out of habit. And we don't actually have those, 4 to 5 hours in between because we're snacking maybe, and we don't actually feel that physical hunger that we are supposed to be feeling. So sometimes we just lose that feeling altogether. So physical hunger comes on gradually and can be satisfied with any food. Emotional hunger, on the other hand, is sudden and often craves specific comfort foods. So recognizing these patterns is crucial in breaking the cycle of emotional eating. So again, on that hunger scale, 10 being I'm stuffed and 0 being, I'm hangry, past hangry. You may even get to the point where you have a headache and you can't function. So physical hunger, you can feel like, okay, I'm starting to get to like maybe a 4 on my hunger scale. And 7 is really being in tune with the body where I'm physically satisfied. Again, this is something that I love that almost gets retaught at the resort with our guests. It's like, okay, we have a balanced breakfast and then we go 4 hours in between having lunch, and then we get to sit and actually eat slowly and feel our bodies actually feel satisfied and not stuffed. So really getting back to that and recognizing the difference between physical hunger and emotional hunger. Again, emotional hunger comes on quickly and is craving specific foods. And oftentimes, you'll eat and you'll still feel hungry and you're not satisfied. And it's like, okay, well, what am I'm trying to feel a hunger that's not being satisfied. Okay, so the second step or strategy for overcoming emotional eating is to identify triggers, which can be so many different things. These could be feelings of, again, we talked about stress or boredom, loneliness, or anger even. Anger can be something where we're trying to just ignore things and not necessarily deal with the actual problem. So once these triggers are identified, alternate coping mechanisms can be developed. If we don't know what emotion we're trying to satisfy, it's going to be hard to come up with other ways to fulfill it. So if it is loneliness, or if it is sadness, or if it is anger, developing different coping mechanisms are different for each of those different emotions. So if we don't know the emotion, then it's going to be a little bit trickier to find the alternate coping mechanisms. But once these are identified, we can do that. So these could be anything from taking a walk, reading a book, or meditating. If it's anger, meditation is a really great tool to overcome anger. But if it's boredom, meditation might not be the right coping mechanism. And if it's boredom, finding other different hobbies or friends or activities that we can do is going to help with the boredom. So develop a deeper understanding of your emotions, identify what you're truly feeling, and being honest with yourself can help you seek more appropriate ways to cope. This is a really important step in overcoming emotional eating, to really track and figure out what are the things that do cause you to go to the pantry or to open up the fridge or to engorge or go and even eating out. What is it that we're trying to fulfill? So is it being around, is it a certain time of the day? Is it being around a certain environment or atmosphere? And what does bring up those emotions, and what emotions are those? So the third step or strategy in overcoming emotional eating is coming up with different healthy coping strategies. And we talked about some of those. And sometimes we're not even aware of what strategies are going to help satisfy the the different emotions. So getting out and trying new things at the resort, I love when guests experience different activities such as pickleball or boxing or hiking. Hiking is a huge one that guests at the resort come and they're like, oh my goodness, I forgot, or I didn't even know that I loved hiking, or a lot of people have never even done a certain class. My dad is at the resort right now, and it was so fun. He just did a pool class because he didn't want to go to stretch. And he was like, I can't believe how good the water feels. And I'm like, this is amazing. Like, he never never would have tried a pool class or an aqua class and until being at the resort. So sometimes we're not even aware of some different activities that can be different, good, healthy coping strategies. My sister just started knitting, and she loves it. And I never would have even thought of knitting. My other sister loves putting puzzles together. And so there's different things, and they never have done anything like that. So a hobby, or discover what genuinely nourishes you emotionally. It might be cooking, it might be crafts, it might be biking or getting outside or something active. It may be meditation, yoga, Pilates. It may be spending time with a friend or reading a book, something that satisfies that emotion of like, okay, number one, I'm not hungry, but I'm going. So, what emotion, first of all, is it? And what can I do instead of eating food that is going to lead to weight gain potentially? Because if that's an issue, that's one. So, why is it bad to emotionally eat? The other thing that happens when we emotionally eat is the feelings of shame and guilt. And a powerlessness over food. Oftentimes with myself over the years, but also working with guests, we get to the point where we feel like we have no control, and I just can't, like, it's something wrong with my brain. In fact, I just saw something the other day with these new injections that a lot of people are taking. It's like, well, I just can't do it on my own and I need help, which I'm not going to argue that. And for some, that's, maybe something that's going to be helpful. But, everything in life, it's like, well, I don't know how to deal with a certain person or a certain thing. So what's the answer? The answer is to learn and maybe get help or get coaching. And oftentimes that can be a ginormous tool with emotional eating, is meeting with the therapist. We have a hypnotherapist at the resort right now that has changed a lot of guests have been coming for years, and they just couldn't see it. They couldn't see the emotion and the action until being in like a state where they were relaxed, and she guided them through their thought process. Because sometimes it's hard to even see. We don't even recognize it. So again, back to the second step, identifying the triggers will help us with this third step of then saying, okay, well, these are the trigger. This is the emotion. This is the trigger. This is the trigger. This is the emotion. What type of activity is going to be fulfill that emotion? Because it's really a big variety of different things. So journaling, meditation, a hobby. Again, what genuinely nourishes you emotionally. Okay, so that's the third step. The fourth step, and we've talked about this, I believe it was just last week, mindful eating. And I mentioned the hunger scale, but the hunger scale can be a really great tool in helping us with emotional eating. So mindful eating does involve the act of being aware of your physical hunger, and it involves eating slowly, savoring each bite, and paying attention to the feeling of fullness. So I try again on that hunger scale while I'm eating, and we know that it takes time for our brain to actually register to our stomach that we're actually full. So that's a really important reason of why we do need to eat slowly and take some time. So oftentimes I'll finish what I feel like my body needs, and then I'm like, but I'm still hungry. So I try and just give myself a few minutes, maybe even leave the table, and then realize that, oh, I actually am full. Because if we wait till we have that feeling, oftentimes we've overeaten. So mindful eating helps to create a healthy relationship with food, where it's seen as nourishment rather than a coping mechanism. One of the things, I've got I've got 6 children, but 3 girls and 3 boys. And I have really loved watching them from an infant. In fact, I have a new grandbaby that it's been so fun to watch her get excited about food and also not be interested in food, because when we come out of the womb, we innately have the ability to know when we're hungry and when we're not. Now, over time, and I feel like sometimes even as a mom, when my kids were hungry, sometimes it was easy to just give them a bottle and to just feed them and not really take care of their maybe actual needs. And so really from a young age, unfortunately, and I'm at fault as a mother, but and it's interesting to watch our kids. With watching our kids, I have really tried to allow them to, eat when they're hungry and not eat when they're not, and not lose that, and also not worry about it, because they also go through growth spurts, and it's an innate thing. And sometimes we've lost that, and it's going to take a little bit of time to get back to, okay, when am I hungry and why am I eating? I think that, and I don't have that on this step, but I think that is an extremely important thing when we are overcoming emotional eating, is to ask ourselves, and this is just comes with the mindful awareness, is asking ourselves why. Why do I want to eat that? Why am I eating this? And is it because we're hungry? Well, or we just want it? I've mentioned this before, and I always think of this with myself and, with my husband. He loves food as well. And sometimes I'm like, does it even taste good? Why? Like, oftentimes I'll tell guests. In fact, I had a guest just yesterday. She said, apparently I've been saying this for a while, but she said, I remember one time you told us that sometimes you spit food out if it doesn't taste good. And I do. She said, I think, and so this guest said, I think about that. And when I'm eating something, and if it doesn't taste good and it doesn't satisfy, like, I have permission to not consume it, because oftentimes we just get into the habit of, like, again, our mom puts something there, our friends, and we feel like we need to eat, and we should never feel like that. Before I go into the last step, I just want to talk a little bit about again, this has to do with why we're eating. And oh man, there's a lot of history, again, starting even as an infant and our mom maybe helping us cope with food. I know I did with my kids, and it was like, oh, they're being loud. They're being, they're bored, and you give them some Cheerios, you give them some fishies, and you try and cure boredom with food. And also celebrations. We have birthdays and we're happy and we're excited. And what do? We eat. So for years we have been emotionally eating. And, I ask myself this question. I wonder that if we took away if dieting never existed, if we had never had even we're aware, if we were never even aware of weight, how would emotionally eating even exist? And I don't think it would. So there's a book, Intuitive Eating, and I have met a lot of dietitians and a lot of nutritionists talk about intuitive eating. And essentially that's what it is. It's learning how to eat without any external influences at all, and really being in tune with our body's hunger, our body's need, why we're eating, and satisfying physical hunger. So using food as fuel and enjoyment without abusing it. So again, if diets and the culture of, weight didn't even exist, and I've watched a lot of individuals, I've observed those who seem to not have any emotional eating struggles. I've watched, and I'm like, why do they not? And weight's never been a thing. And they've eaten when they were hungry, and they ate what they wanted and not what they thought they should have. Because oftentimes, we're trying to eat a certain way, and we're trying to eat what we've been told we should eat. And then we're not really listening to our body, because if we never had any of that, we probably could have a cookie and not just have a cookie because that's what our body needed, and not have the need to have 4 and 5 and 6 or more. if that makes sense. So really, emotionally eating has been taught. We have created emotional eating, and the only way to really undo emotional eating is to try and unlearn some of those things and then also become desensitized or not influenced by the external sources, which is hard because it's around us constantly. So again, with this new drug and the injections that a lot are become extremely popular and are working for a lot of people, I heard a gal say, I just had no control and all I did was think about food, and my brain is just wired like this and it's a disease, talking about obesity as a disease. And I'm not going to say whether or not it is or isn't. I just want to put this out there and say, well, is it, or have we created it? Have we created it because of the culture and we feel like we have no control? We feel like we can't make the decisions because we have not learned how to use food as fuel and enjoyment without abusing it, because we're constantly trying to satisfy emotions and eating for the wrong reason. And sometimes also not eat or taking it for what it is. There are times where I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not hungry, but I want to have this cookie or I want to eat something. And then if we allow, so I love this. I heard this from a dietitian years ago, that restriction breeds rebellion. And think about that. Think about how many times we have been told or have told ourselves, oh, I can't have that, or I shouldn't eat that. And if that never even existed, do you think do you think we would even want those things? Because oftentimes when we're told we can't have something, we all know it's like that's the thing that we constantly think about. So this gal who, thinks, I just have no control over my thinking and that's all I think about is my food and this drug is helping her not. Is it because, there's something wired in her brain, or, and again, just be open, because I think this is around us like crazy. If this never even existed, would we even have the problem? I don't think we would. I think that, somebody growing up in an environment, in fact, there's a lot of studies that show a set of twins, and you put them in two different environments, and one environment is like totally obsessed with, weight and food, and they become obsessive about it. And they don't know how to, cope with their emotions. They're not aware of their emotions. And they, that this twin is struggles with their weight. And in a twin in another environment where food is not obsessed about, it's not restricted, and we're taught healthy coping mechanisms, there's not a weight issue. I totally believe that. I know for myself, I have really tried being in the health and fitness industry, owning a fitness resort, having gained weight with pregnancies and struggled a little bit myself with weight, and having it not be something that's easy, and having the pressure of whether it's pressure, it's certainly not pressure for other people, the pressure I put on myself of maybe looking a certain way. We've created a really toxic culture, and we, as individuals, we can blame it on everybody else, or we can take the accountability and ownership of our actions and our choices and say, you know what? Again, recognize it, and then we can change it. And again, my dad, I grew up, and everybody, I'm sure, their parents at one point heard or were told, nobody can make you happy. And my dad, every time I remember, and my sister, we were just talking about this, like, oh man, don't you remember Dad? Just anytime we were complaining about somebody, he was a I don't want to say therapist, but a counselor in schools. So he dealt with a lot of kids coming in, and he would always just say, well, you don't have control over yourself. You don't have control over anybody else. And you're the only person who can make you happy. And, that was a really important lesson for us to learn. And there's a lot of other people. And if we, keep waiting for other people to affect our emotions or how we feel, it's going to be a very frustrating road. And we'll probably turn to whether it's food, and a lot of people have different addictions and that could be extremely toxic and unhealthy. There's a lot of things that people use as coping for emotions as opposed to actually dealing with the emotions themselves. So, the last strategy for overcoming emotional eating is a support system. So, leaning on friends, family, or support group to share your feelings. There's a lot of support groups. Just like AA, there's support groups for overeating, emotional eating, and it really does help. To speaking out loud can be incredibly liberating and healing. A nutritionist can also provide valuable insight and strategies to overcome emotional eating. A nutritionist, a life coach, a hypnotherapist, some type of third party that can help us actually identify, because sometimes that's the problem is we just can't see. We're so disconnected. And so it's been something that we've been doing for so many years that it is hard to recognize. I'm just going to finish with going over our journal prompt for this week. And it has you identify a time when you felt, and I feel like we've probably all done this. In fact, I remember, it was so many years. I remember growing up, I loved to make cinnamon rolls on Sundays. And I remember I don't remember a lot of details about it, but I remember eating to the point where I felt sick. And I didn't like it. And I remember it was like either the emotions of being bored. So, that was a long, long, long time ago. And I have times where it was even just recent, even just, a time where you were on vacation or you were celebrating, or maybe a time, I know there's definitely times where I'm like, I don't even want to think about something. So I'm just going to, and I just, chose to eat rather than maybe going on a walk or doing something else. So identifying a time, maybe seeing what it was, what the emotion was, and then write a list or start. If there aren't things that you already do, I already have a lot of different coping strategies that I try to do. One is leave the kitchen, go for a walk. I love to sit down, and I'm fine. For me personally, and this might not be a coping strategy for some because maybe they for years eating and watching a movie was a habit. For me, watching a movie and eating, I've never really had that coping mechanism. So for me, watching a movie can be a coping mechanism that can avoid food. Going and doing something, leaving the house can be a great thing. Exercise is a really big one for me. So getting outside really helps clear my mind and allows me to really be in tune and touch with. There's not really a lot of hobbies that I personally have. Meditation, I do enjoy and love. Journaling has also been something that's been helpful for me. But having a support system, a group, some friends not friends that struggle with the same problem as you and actually, that you practice emotional eating with, but friends or family that can help you avoid those. So just to recap and in conclusion, the 5 strategies. So awareness, identifying triggers, and then having healthy coping strategies, practicing the art of mindful eating, and then lastly, a support system. Emotionally eating is a real thing, whether we are aware of us doing it or not. That can be untaught, unlearned. And it really is a process. It's not going to be easy, but with understanding and practice and patience, I promise it's going to take patience. It's certainly achievable. It is actually possible to develop a healthier relationship with food. I have really been grateful and have enjoyed my experience of learning about emotional eating by working with others, and then also being able to understand and be like, oh my goodness, how has this affected me personally? And I'm not there. I still continually struggle with it, and I will definitely find myself emotionally eating daily. And the goal is to just get to the point where we do it less and less, and we become aware back to the why we eat. For me, when we find ourselves, and this doesn't happen all the time for me, but it happens more often, and it's getting to the point where it's happening more often than not, where I can look at something and say, yeah, I don't really want that, as opposed to be like, oh, I really want that, but I can't have it. And, then I feel sad, I feel tired, I feel angry, and I eat it. So, practicing this, and it's like practice makes perfect with anything. And, doing it once gives you that satisfaction of like, oh my gosh, I can do that. And then, just repeating that habit over and over of like, okay, what do I feel like? Am I hungry? And what's going to satisfy my needs? This is something that really every day when I'm going to make a food choice, I'll ask myself those things. Okay, how many hours has it been since I ate last? What have I eaten? Have I had any vegetables? Hadn't I had any fruit? Have I had some whole grains? Have I had my protein? And being aware. So it's really those tools can help us overcome emotional eating. So I hope that this can be a fun thing, not something that feels like not a fun thing to address. It's exciting. It's exciting to be able to recognize and be like, okay, you know what? I've done years and years of emotional eating, and this is exciting because I know with awareness and with these tools, I can overcome emotional eating. So that's this week's chapter 12 of emotional eating. Next chapter 13, we are going to be discussing what diet works for you. This is one topic that I love because it's so overwhelming with the different things out there, and it's hard to know what's going to be best for us. So join us next week for chapter 13 of Your 2024 Story.